Aloha and welcome to Ho'olokai. Mahalo for joining us today. As you recall, a couple of weeks ago, we had a program that was a report produced by Rutgers University Center for Women in Politics, and it was entitled African American Women and Their Status in American Politics. Today we'll have a complementary type of report, and it's going to be entitled Gender Parity and the Status of Republican Women. Let's begin by first defining what gender parity is, or what the Gender Parity Index is. And basically it refers to a social economic index that speaks to the equitability or access to education that women have as opposed to men. If we were to relate gender parity to American politics, or specifically to Congress, the Senate, or the House, that would mean how closely the numbers are aligned or equal with each other. For example, if there were 100 seats in Congress, for example, what portion or percentage of them are actually held by females? If, let's say, they were 150 seats, how closely are we aligned to maybe having women but 75 seats? Greater gender parity in elected leadership may well be the battle cry for American women in the upcoming 2018 election. After the election of 2016, American women remain less than 1/4 of elected leaders in all levels of office. But the times, they are a-changing. For decades, research has surrounded questions to why women remain so underrepresented, and what are the barriers which still remain to be lifted to curtail gender disparity and to finally yield gender parity. Kelly Dittmar's Candidate Matter, Gender Differences in Election of 2016 through Rutgers University Center for American Women in Politics gives us a closer look to achieving a better understanding of this issue that is so dear to the hearts of women who've spent a lifetime advocating for equity or benefiting from the demands of equity. Surprisingly enough, she found that once women do become candidates and run, researchers showed that they win at the same rate as their male counterparts. So what's it all about then? It appears that, in fact, a persistence dearth of women candidates win rates. These conclusions are consistent no matter one's political party affiliation. However, the most staggering dearth of women candidates is particularly acute among women of the Republican Party. So let's talk about that. First, the U.S. House of Representatives. Second, the Senate. Third, the state legislatures. Fourth, the statewide executive offices. The U.S. House of Representatives. In 2016, the number of women who filed to run for the U.S. House of Representatives fell short of a previous record high in 2012 of 298, some 26 women more than of 2016, 272. Republican women remained in a minority of women who chose to run and who won House seats in 2016. They were only 35% of the women who filed for House seats, 28% women nominees, and just a mere 1/4 of the women who won in November 2016. The Republican women unfortunately fared even worse within the Republican Party. They were only 11% of Republicans who filed for House seats and just a mere 9% of all Republican House winners in 2016. Republican women fared slightly worse on the primary election and general states of the election of 2016. In the primary, some 48%, 0.2 to 51.73% among male Republicans differed a difference of 3.35%. In the general election, 45.6% women compared to 56.56 men, of the difference being 10.91% from that of women. The U.S. Senate. Some 40 women in 2016 filed to run as candidates for the U.S. Senate, only 4 more than the previous election. Republican women were 1/3 of those women who filed, approximately 15 for the Senate seats, making 27% female nominees and only 17% of women who won a Senate seat in 2016. Republican women were 11% of Republicans who filed, 12% of Republican nominees, and just 5% of Republican winners. No non-incumbent Republican woman was successful in the 2016 general election, while some 22% of Republican men were elected. In the primary, Republican women were 30.77%, where Republican men were only 27.88%, a 2.89% increase over women. In general, the Republican women were 25%, yet Republican men were a whopping 72.41%, some 47.41% difference. Only one Republican woman incumbent was successfully re-elected. The state legislature. On a state legislature level, some 2,649 women were on the ballot throughout America. Some 900 Republican women nominees, or some 2/3, won 600 seats in their races. Republican women fared well in open state legislative seats. Some 2/3 Republican nominees won open seat contests. Republican women also fared better than Republican men as non-incumbents candidates. Republican men, however, outperformed in all general election nominees. In the general election, men were 72.54%, where Republican women were only 66.17%, an advantage of 5.87% winning rate. Statewide executive office. With regard to Republican women in statewide executive office, a smaller portion of women filed, won primaries, contests, and/or won general election races for statewide executive office for 2016. In contrast, 2/3 of the Republican women nominees won their statewide elected executive office. In the primary, some 58.33% were Republican women winners, as compared to 57.95% were Republican men, a minuscule 0.39% difference. So what's it all about, Alfie? Well, at the very least, this is a call for women, Republican women, to be actively involved in the body electoral politique, which may, in fact, require dramatic reform in the electoral process. This should include, but not limited to, short-term inclusionary measures, while not overlooking the critical importance of meeting the needs of the long-term systemic challenges. Inclusionary measures is perhaps one of the most immediate interventions, not only to accomplish gender parity, but election reform. Incentivizing women's participation, declaration of candidacy, launching of campaign, maintaining a presence in the primary, surviving to be in the general, should be the fundamental funding distribution basis for all elections to increase the number of women who are in sustainable national election campaigns. Not to mention that this should be the post-platform point for the collection of aggregated data regarding women's participation in the electoral process. Evidence as to the meetings of these benchmarks and or their shortcomings should be the determining factor of whether or not funds should be awarded or withdrawn of its awards. We should consider early citizenship identification and capturing of high school students through the students' participation in the political process, and to mentor our high school students. We should further consider the creation of candidate incubators that diverge from the traditional candidate recruitment process. This will enable us to tap into the marginalized and or the disenfranchised communities for candidate selection, yet are those individuals that are outstanding ethically and morally sound characters, increasing the sheer numbers of Republican women running for office. We should also consider something that's called pay forward, where successful candidates, after they have become elected, will in fact be willing to pledge a certain amount of their income in order to elect the next generation of Republican women office holders. Systemic challenges and its influence upon the election reform operates within a long-term realm, yet they go hand in hand with impacting women elected into office. Without change here, there will only be stagnation there and elsewhere. First, one must consider the high personal and financial costs of running a viable political career, which in itself is a deterrent to many not willing to place family, marriage, physical, emotional, health at risk, as well as invasion of personal privacy. Still another systemic challenge to women's election process and women's success falls under the umbrella of incumbent privilege, whereby a politician who is already holding a seat has a 95% chance of being reelected. This is due to widespread name recognition on the television, on the radio, and walking throughout his or her community. Gatekeepers of the party also tend to support incumbents. Incumbents are usually not forthcoming in participating in debating the issues, being held in any way accountable to task in public forums. Gerrymandering is another strategic advantage of an incumbent. This is a quite common practice of drawing or redrawing district boundary lines to preserve incumbents' voting bloc advantage. Incumbents prefer not to disturb his or her political basis, a basis that got him or her elected in the first place. These boundaries are usually changed due to population movement, either in the growth factor or degrowthing. Yet another incumbent advantage is the system of franking. This term actually dates back to the early 1900s, where elected officials were and are given the privilege of having free mail at no cost. In an election, mailing to potential voters can be a very expensive endeavor, especially for a new candidate. This incumbent advantage during election has won many an election, rallying the voters even till the last minute of the election. And finally, one of an incumbent's most prized possession is that of his or her war chest that has been accumulated all year round. Some seasoned politicians do as much fundraising on non-election years as election years, which is their arsenal for preserving and protecting the seat of their election. In summarizing, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times, but I think personally it's the best time to be a Republican, especially a Republican woman, because Republican women want to stand up for principles that will preserve our Constitution and the values that it honors. Principles that we need to start growing America's economy instead of Washington's economy, so that working Americans can have better wages and more opportunities. We need to pass balanced budgets and to amend our Constitution to make government more efficient and leave the next generation opportunities that transcend just debt. We need to start over with our real healthcare reform that actually puts patients and doctors in charge, not unelected bureaucrats in Washington. We also, as Republican women, need to honor our veterans who have earned our respect and gratitude. And no veteran should have to wait in line for months or years before they can see a doctor. We as Republican women need to be strong in keeping America safe and strong. That requires a strong military, growing economy, energy independence, and secure borders. And we as Republican women want to be in the forefront that every child should have an opportunity to have a great education, and that no parent should be forced to send their children to failing schools. As I've said before, it's the best of times, and it's no better time to be a Republican. And we as Republican women want to be able to lift the next generation of elected officials and the next generation of Republican women. on the backs of each other. And that can be done by lifting each other up in their success for campaigning to be an elected official. E komo mai kai ho'olokai. Mahalo and aloha.